Linda had always prided herself on running a tight ship at the dealership. From the polished floors to the sleek cars lining the showroom, everything was meticulously managed. She was known for being efficient, disciplined, and unapologetically tough. The dealership was her life. She knew every detail about the business, from inventory to finances, and her employees respected her for it. But deep down, Linda felt the pressure mounting. Sales had dropped over the past few months, and the corporate board was breathing down her neck. If she didn't turn things around soon, she could lose everything. Tonight, she was staying late, trying to come up with a strategy to bring in more customers. The place was nearly empty. The last few salespeople had already left for the night, and only the sound of the car's soft engines humming quietly in the background filled the room. Linda leaned over her desk, eyes scanning the papers, trying to figure out how she could make the numbers add up. That was when he walked in. The man, tall and imposing, wore a hoodie and jeans, his presence almost intimidating. His movements were slow and deliberate, as though he was trying to blend in with the shiny cars surrounding him, but something about him stood out. Linda barely looked up from her papers at first, assuming he was just another tire kicker, someone looking to test drive cars without any intention of buying. She wasn't in the mood to entertain such clients tonight. With a sigh, she put the papers down and stood up, ready to deal with whatever would come her way. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone sharp, a slight irritation in her voice. She was always polite, but tonight, her patience was running thin. The man smiled, but it wasn't a smile that made Linda feel at ease. It was too knowing, too confident. "I'm just looking," he replied smoothly, his deep voice carrying an air of mystery. Linda glanced at the man, sizing him up. He didn't look like he belonged in a dealership like this. His clothes were casual, but there was something in his demeanor that made her feel uneasy. He wasn't like the usual high-end buyers who came in to purchase a luxury vehicle. He seemed out of place, but there was also an aura of authority about him that she couldn't quite place. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but this felt different. As he walked around the showroom, his eyes scanning the cars, Linda felt a sense of unease creeping in. He stopped in front of a high-end model, a sleek black sedan, running his fingers over the hood. Linda watched him closely, her frustration growing. This man wasn't even interested in talking to her, and if he wasn't going to engage, she wasn't going to waste her time. "Are you planning to buy something today, or are you just browsing?" Linda asked, her voice tightening slightly. She wasn't in the mood to babysit someone who wasn't serious about making a deal. The man turned to her slowly, his gaze locking with hers. There was an odd intensity in his eyes. "I'm looking for something special," he said. There was no aggression in his tone, just a calm, almost detached quality. Linda's patience was wearing thin. She had a job to do, and the longer this man lingered, the more frustrated she became. "I'm not here to entertain window shoppers," she snapped, her tone biting. "If you're not ready to make a decision, maybe you should come back another time." The man didn't seem taken aback by her attitude. Instead, he chuckled softly, the sound almost amused. "I think I'm ready," he said cryptically. "But what I want you can't offer me. At least not at the price you're asking." Linda stared at him, feeling a rush of irritation. "If you want a deal, I suggest you make up your mind quickly," she replied, already tired of the conversation. That was when things took a strange turn. The man, who had been quiet for most of the exchange, now stepped forward, looking directly at Linda. "I'm not here to negotiate prices," he said, his voice now serious. "I'm here because I own this place." Linda froze, the words taking a moment to register. "What did you say?" she asked, her tone less hostile now but still edged with disbelief. "I said," he repeated slowly, as though explaining something to a child, "I own this dealership. The entire operation. The cars, the building, everything." Linda laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Right. I've heard that one before," she said, shaking her head. "You think you can just walk in here and say you own the place? I'm not buying it." The man's expression didn't change. He didn't look offended, just calm. You will believe it tomorrow, he said. I'm Shaquille. And I've just bought this dealership. Linda's eyes narrowed. This was too bizarre to be true. You're telling me, she said slowly, that you, in your hoodie, came in here and you're the new owner? No way. I don't believe it. Shaquille looked at her without an ounce of emotion on his face. Believe it. Tomorrow, everything will change here. I'm taking over. With that, he turned and walked toward the door, the faint echo of his footsteps reverberating through the quiet showroom. Linda stood there, dumbfounded. She was trying to process what had just happened, but the words didn't make sense. The new owner? The man in front of her? He was just another customer. But he'd been so calm, so confident. What if he was telling the truth? The dealership, her livelihood, was slipping from her grasp. If what he said was true, then everything she had worked for could be upended. The sale numbers, the impending audit, everything could change in a heartbeat. Linda had just kicked out her new boss. And she had no idea what consequences would follow. As Shaquille disappeared into the night, Linda was left alone in the showroom, a whirlwind of doubt and anxiety settling over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some strange encounter. Something bigger was at play, and Linda had no idea how deep it went. She only knew one thing for certain: her world was about to be turned upside down, and she would have to confront it head-on. The next morning, Linda walked into the dealership early, trying to shake off the strange encounter with Shaquille the night before. She had to focus on her tasks. The audit was coming, and she needed to make sure everything was in order. Her mind, however, kept drifting back to the man who claimed to be the new owner. She couldn't get the words out of her head. I own this place. Linda knew the dealership had been struggling, but she hadn't heard anything about a new ownership deal. She was certain she would have been informed of something as significant as that. She dismissed it as some sort of bizarre joke, a prank perhaps. No one could just walk in off the street and claim ownership of a business without anyone knowing. Yet something in her gut told her to be wary. As she walked past the rows of luxury vehicles, a sharp buzz interrupted her thoughts. The office phone rang. Linda sighed, picking it up. Linda here, she answered, trying to sound professional. Ms. Linda. The voice on the other end was cold and businesslike. We have a situation here. Linda felt a knot form in her stomach. What kind of situation? There's someone here to see you. A government agent, the receptionist said, her voice trembling slightly. He says it's urgent. Linda's heart skipped a beat. A government agent? What on earth could this be about? Send him in, she replied, trying to remain composed. Minutes later, a tall man in a sharp suit entered her office. He had an air of authority about him, his posture rigid and stern. He didn't offer a handshake, but his piercing gaze fixed directly on Linda. Ms. Linda, he said, his voice direct and commanding. I'm Agent Park. I'm here to discuss the recent changes to your dealership's ownership. Linda blinked in confusion. I'm sorry, what are you talking about? I've been here for years, and I haven't heard anything about a change in ownership. Are you sure you have the right place? Agent Park's eyes narrowed, as if expecting this kind of reaction. It's true, he said, leaning forward slightly. You've just been informed about the change in ownership, correct? Linda's heart raced. No, I haven't heard anything about this. Who's the new owner? Agent Park studied her for a moment before speaking. A man named Shaquille. He's purchased this dealership, effective immediately. He's the new owner. Linda felt her breath catch in her throat. Her mind flashed back to last night's encounter with Shaquille. Could it really have been true? No, it didn't make sense. But here was a government agent confirming it. This can't be real, Linda muttered, shaking her head. I kicked him out last night. There's no way he owns this place. Believe me, Ms. Linda, Agent Park replied, his voice now softer but firm. He does. And I need to warn you, Shaquille is not your average businessman. There's a lot more to him than meets the eye. This is not just about a change of ownership. It's part of a larger investigation. Linda's head spun. She couldn't focus. What investigation? Agent Park paused, then slowly spoke. Shaquille is connected to some high-level operations. His business dealings go far beyond a car dealership. This purchase is part of something much bigger. We've been monitoring him for some time now, and this acquisition is linked to a much larger network of operations. Linda's mind was reeling. What does that mean for me? What do I do? Agent Park leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Linda's face. That's up to you. But I'm telling you this, you're now in the middle of something much bigger than you realize. You'll need to decide whether to align yourself with Shaquille or whether to resist. Linda's head was spinning. How could this be happening? She had no idea how deep this went. A few hours ago, her biggest concern was the dealership's financial problems. Now, she was staring down a government agent telling her she was in the middle of a criminal investigation, all because of a man she had kicked out the night before. The agent stood up, ready to leave. I'm going to give you some time to think about this. We'll be watching, Ms. Linda. You need to make a decision. Wait, Linda said, rising to her feet. What am I supposed to do? How do I even begin to figure this out? Agent Park paused at the door, turning to face her. You'll figure it out. Just know this, if you're in, you need to be all in. There's no going back once you're involved. The door clicked shut behind him, and Linda was left alone in her office. The weight of everything settled on her shoulders. She was staring down a crossroad, and she didn't know which path to take. Was Shaquille really the villain in this story? Or was he a misunderstood man with a greater purpose? Was Linda ready to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking everything? Her mind raced with questions she didn't have the answers to. The dealership she had spent her career building could be a front for something dangerous. Was she now part of that world, too? Or was there a chance she could still change the course of this story? The only thing she knew for sure was that her life, as she knew it, had just been turned upside down. As Linda sat back down at her desk, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a government agent or an urgent call. It was Shaquille's name flashing across the screen. Her stomach twisted in knots. She couldn't avoid him any longer. He was the key to all of this. Linda! Shaquille's voice came through the phone. It was calm, too calm. We need to talk. Linda felt the weight of the moment. She was about to step into a world she hadn't prepared for. Linda sat at her desk, staring at the phone in her hand, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and dread. Shaquille's call had left her reeling, and every part of her body screamed to just ignore it, to pretend this wasn't happening, to go back to business as usual. But she knew that wasn't an option. She had no choice but to face whatever had been set in motion. She didn't trust him, not after last night. The man had claimed to own the dealership, but everything about him felt wrong. Yet here she was, listening to her own instincts telling her that this wasn't just about a business transaction. There was something bigger at play. Something dangerous. The phone buzzed again, breaking her out of her spiraling thoughts. Shaquille's name flashed on the screen. Without thinking, she answered. Linda, we need to meet. Shaquille's voice was calm but insistent. I know you're confused, but this is bigger than both of us. We need to talk in person. About what? Linda's voice was sharp, defensive. You're telling me you bought the dealership, and now you're some kind of criminal mastermind? I'm supposed to just walk into your trap. Shaquille chuckled on the other end of the line. It's not a trap, Linda. But I understand why you'd think that. I'm asking you to trust me. I didn't buy this dealership for the reasons you think. Linda was silent, biting her lip as a wave of skepticism washed over her. Could she trust him? Could she even afford not to? I'll meet you, she said, her voice firming. But I need to know what this is really about. And if you're lying to me, I swear, I will not hesitate to go to the authorities. Shaquille agreed to meet her at a nearby cafe. Linda arrived early, her mind racing with questions. What was she walking into? Was Shaquille truly the man behind the shady operation she'd uncovered, or was there another side to the story she didn't understand? The agent had warned her that he was involved in more than just business. It was clear Linda was tangled up in something far beyond her control. When Shaquille arrived, Linda immediately noticed how calm and composed he appeared. There was no sense of urgency in his movements, no hint of the tension she was feeling. He looked entirely at ease. He ordered coffee, sitting down across from her without saying a word. She studied him carefully, searching for any signs of guilt, any crack in his polished demeanor. But there was nothing. Just an air of confidence, the kind of confidence that made her feel small in comparison. "All right," Linda said, breaking the silence. "Let's hear it. What's going on here?" Shaquille looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "I know you don't trust me, and I understand why. But you have to understand, this isn't about taking over a car dealership. This is about fixing something that's been broken for a long time." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Fixing it? You mean stealing it?" "No," Shaquille replied, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not stealing anything. I'm making it right." Linda's patience was wearing thin. "Right? By what? By owning the place and hiding behind shady deals?" Shaquille's expression hardened for the first time. "You don't know everything, Linda. You haven't seen the bigger picture." "I've seen enough," she snapped. "I've seen your shady financial moves, the connections to all these underhanded businesses. Don't sit here and tell me you're some kind of savior." Shaquille leaned forward, his gaze fixed on hers. "I didn't get involved in this to be a hero. I got involved because I saw something I can change. This dealership, this company, it's been a part of a system that's been corrupted for years. I didn't buy it for the money. I bought it because I have a plan to fix it, to take down the system that's been controlling it." Linda felt a knot form in her stomach. This was starting to sound like something much darker than a simple business deal. "What kind of system?" she asked cautiously. "The kind that uses businesses like this one to manipulate and control entire industries," Shaquille answered, his voice low. "I've been watching, studying, and waiting for the right time. This dealership, this very place, is at the heart of it. And if I can take it down from the inside, I can expose the corruption that's been festering for years." Linda felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea the dealership was involved in anything like that. "Are you telling me you bought this place just to take it down?" she asked, incredulity in her voice. "Not just this place," Shaquille said, shaking his head. "This is bigger than you think. The money, the power, it's all part of a much larger game. I've been fighting it for years. And now I have the resources to do something about it." Linda processed his words, trying to make sense of what he was saying. A part of her wanted to call him crazy, to walk away and never look back. But another part of her, the part that had been feeling something was off for so long, began to wonder if there was some truth to his story. "And what do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "I want you to help me," Shaquille replied. "You know this dealership inside and out. You know the players, you know the operations. I need someone who understands how the system works, someone who can help me dismantle it from within. You have a choice, Linda. You can help me, or you can walk away. But if you choose the latter, you'll be leaving everything you know behind. And I'm not sure you want that." Linda took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. She didn't know whether to trust him, but she couldn't deny the gut feeling telling her there was more to this than met the eye. "I'll help you," she said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "But if I'm going down this path with you, I need to know everything. No more secrets." Shaquille nodded, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You'll have it. But you need to understand, this is a fight. And it won't be easy." Linda glanced out the window, her mind racing. Her life was about to change forever, whether she was ready for it or not. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a purpose beyond just managing cars. This was bigger than business. This was about justice. And maybe, just maybe, she could help make it right. Linda stared at the coffee in front of her, the words Shaquille had spoken still echoing in her mind. The conversation had left her with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: she had a choice to make. She could walk away from this, pretend it didn't exist, or she could dive into a world that was far darker than she had ever imagined. Either way, there would be no going back. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, tapping the number she had been avoiding since last night. The phone rang, and for a moment, Linda considered hanging up. But the reality was staring her in the face. She needed answers. She needed to understand the true scope of what was happening. She couldn't fight a war without knowing what she was up against. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was an edge of impatience to it. "Linda," the voice said, "I've been expecting your call. We need to move quickly." "Who are you?" Linda's voice was cold, guarded. "What's really going on here?" "Not a conversation for the phone," the voice replied. "But I'll give you one piece of advice: stay close to Shaquille. You can't afford to be an outsider in this." Linda's mind raced as she processed the cryptic message. "I've already agreed to work with him," she said, her voice tight. "But I don't know what I'm really walking into." "That's the problem," the voice said sharply. "You think you do, but you don't. Shaquille isn't who he says he is. He's playing a much bigger game. And if you're not careful, you'll end up as collateral damage." The phone clicked off before Linda could respond. She sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Shaquille's world was far more complex than she had first believed. She had thought she understood the stakes, but now she was beginning to question everything. What was his endgame? And who was really pulling the strings? The next few days were a blur. Linda kept her head down, working alongside Shaquille, trying to absorb everything she could. Every move he made seemed calculated, precise. But there were gaps in the story, things he didn't share, things he didn't explain. She watched as he navigated the intricacies of the business with ease, making decisions that impacted everyone in the dealership. The employees followed him without question, as if he held some kind of sway over them. It was unsettling. She had learned enough to know that he wasn't just a businessman, he was a strategist, a mastermind. His plan went beyond just the dealership. She could see it in the way he interacted with the staff, the way he positioned himself as the center of the operation. He wasn't just taking over the business, he was reshaping it in his image, and she was right there, in the middle of it. Linda had hoped that by working with Shaquille, she would uncover his motivations, find out what drove him. But the more she learned, the more questions she had. Who was he really working for? And what was he really trying to accomplish? Late one night, after a long day of meetings and negotiations, Linda found herself in Shaquille's office again. She had asked to meet with him, needing clarification, needing answers. He had agreed, but she could sense the tension in the air. There was something about him, something she couldn't put her finger on. It wasn't just his control over the dealership, it was something deeper, darker. "You wanted to talk?" Shaquille said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it. He was already seated at his desk, looking at her like he was waiting for something. Linda hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I need to know what's really going on. Why the dealership? Why all the secrecy?" Shaquille leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her. "I told you already," he said slowly, as though explaining something to a child. "This place is just one part of a much larger plan." Linda felt a knot form in her stomach. "What plan?" Shaquille's expression hardened. "I didn't just buy the dealership to make money, Linda. I bought it because it's connected to something far more dangerous than you realize. There's an entire network behind this, people who have been controlling industries for years, people who have been pulling the strings from the shadows. I'm taking it all down, piece by piece." Linda felt her breath catch. She had suspected it, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. "And you expect me to just go along with this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't expect anything from you," Shaquille replied, his tone flat. "You're the one who made the choice to get involved. You can walk away any time, But I'm not stopping. I can't. Too much is at stake. The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. Linda could feel the walls closing in around her. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a fight for power, an attempt to dismantle a system that had been built over decades. And Linda was now an unwilling player in the game. She had been questioning everything, her role, her choices, her values. But now, she understood something deeper. Shaquille wasn't just taking over the dealership for personal gain. He was trying to tear down the foundation of something much bigger, something that affected every industry, every business, every person. This wasn't just about money or power, this was about changing the world. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she understood his resolve. He was in this for something far more significant than she had ever imagined. And in a strange way, she respected that. I need to think, Linda said quietly. I can't just dive into this blindly. Shaquille nodded, his expression softening slightly. I understand. But time is running out. You don't have much time to decide. We're running out of options. Linda left his office, her mind spinning. She couldn't ignore the gravity of what he had said, the way he spoke with such conviction. The truth was, she had no idea what was really happening. But one thing was clear, her life was never going to be the same again. The decision was hers to make. And no matter what she chose, there would be no turning back. Linda woke up the next morning with a sense of urgency that she couldn't shake off. The decision she had made the night before lingered in her mind, and she couldn't escape the reality of the situation. Shaquille had made it clear, time was running out. The wheels were already in motion, and there was no turning back. She had chosen to stay in this fight, but what did that really mean? She had spent the last few days watching, learning, and trying to understand the scope of Shaquille's plans. It was overwhelming. Every decision he made seemed calculated, precise, and yet, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough to understand that this wasn't just about a car dealership anymore. This was about dismantling an entire system of corruption that had been in place for far too long. The pressure was starting to build. The employees were starting to notice the changes. The dealership, once a well-oiled machine, was beginning to show signs of strain. The new policies Shaquille had implemented were slowly transforming the business, but not everyone was on board. There were whispers among the staff, doubts about Shaquille's true intentions, and Linda could feel the tension growing. She spent her days walking the dealership floor, trying to gauge the mood of the employees. Some were eager to embrace the changes, excited by the possibility of a fresh start. But others, those who had been with the company for years, were more skeptical. They had seen it all before: new ownership, broken promises, failed attempts at change. Linda knew they were scared. Scared of losing their jobs, scared of the unknown. But Linda had made a promise to herself. She had committed to Shaquille's vision, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. She would give everything she had to make this work. For the employees, for the dealership, and for herself. She wasn't just a manager anymore, she was part of something much bigger. And the weight of that responsibility was starting to settle in. She met with Shaquille again that afternoon. The conversation was different this time. There was no small talk, no pleasantries. It was all business, all strategy. Shaquille had a plan, and Linda was now a key player in it. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: things were moving fast, and there was no room for hesitation. I've been watching, Shaquille said, his voice steady. You're doing well. The changes are taking root. But we need more. We need to push harder. We can't afford to slow down now. Linda nodded, her mind racing. I know, she replied, her voice tight. But the employees, they're starting to doubt. They're worried about the future. They don't know what to expect. Shaquille leaned forward, his eyes focused. Doubt is natural. But we can't let it stop us. People will always resist change, especially when they don't understand it. We need to show them that this is for the greater good. We need to lead by example. Linda took a deep breath. But what about the bigger picture? The system you're trying to dismantle? How do we fight something that powerful? Shaquille's gaze softened, just for a moment. We fight it by taking control of the narrative. We show people that we're not just another corporation. We show them that we stand for something bigger than profits. We create a culture of accountability, of transparency, and of justice. And once we have that, the system can't control us anymore. Linda was silent for a moment, processing his words. She didn't fully understand everything he was saying, but the passion in his voice was undeniable. He believed in this. And despite her doubts, Linda found herself starting to believe in it too. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady now. Shaquille smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I need you to keep pushing. I need you to be the bridge between the old and the new. The employees trust you, Linda. They listen to you. You're the one who can bring them on board." Linda nodded again, feeling a sense of determination settle in her chest. She had been hesitant, unsure of what the future held. But now, she saw the path ahead of her. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be obstacles along the way. But she wasn't going to back down. She had made her choice, and she was going to see it through. Over the next few weeks, Linda worked tirelessly to implement the changes Shaquille had outlined. She met with employees, listened to their concerns, and tried to reassure them. She knew it wouldn't be easy to win their trust, but she was determined to do it. She pushed harder than she ever had before, not just for the success of the dealership, but for the people who depended on it. She believed in the vision Shaquille had laid out, and she was willing to fight for it. The dealership began to show signs of improvement. Sales started to climb, and customer satisfaction began to rise. The employees were still wary, but they could see the changes happening in real time. They saw that Shaquille wasn't just another businessman looking to make a quick buck. He was different. And, despite their reservations, they started to come around. But Linda knew that the hardest part was still ahead of her. The system Shaquille was trying to dismantle wasn't going to fall easily. There would be opposition, and there would be those who would stop at nothing to maintain the status quo. Linda was ready for the fight. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed Shaquille, and she needed the support of the employees. Together, they would have to stand up to the system that had controlled them for so long. As she looked around the dealership floor, Linda felt a sense of pride. She wasn't just managing a business anymore. She was part of a movement. And no matter what happened next, she knew she was on the right side of history. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Linda was ready to lead the charge. And she wasn't backing down. Linda's commitment to Shaquille's vision was beginning to feel like a weight on her shoulders. The dealership had started to show progress, but it wasn't enough. The doubts from the employees were still there, lingering beneath the surface. They were hesitant, unsure if the changes they were seeing would stick or if they were just another temporary fix. Linda knew that in order for Shaquille's vision to succeed, they needed more than just surface-level improvements. They needed a complete transformation. The atmosphere around the dealership had shifted. It was no longer just a place for cars to be sold, it was now a battleground of ideologies, values, and trust. Linda could feel the tension rising, and she knew that she had to take a stand. But as much as she tried to reassure her team, the fight was far from over. There was still a massive wall of resistance they had to break down. The employees who had been there for years, the ones who had seen countless ownership changes and failed promises, were skeptical. Linda had expected this. She knew it wouldn't be easy to convince them that Shaquille wasn't like the others. But the longer she worked alongside him, the more she saw a side of him that wasn't reflected in the cold, calculated business persona he put on. He was driven by a sense of purpose that Linda hadn't encountered in years. Shaquille wasn't just out to make money or control the industry. He was trying to rewrite the rules. And despite her growing trust in him, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that the risk was still too great. One afternoon, Linda received an unexpected call from a familiar voice, a voice that made her blood run cold. It was Agent Park. The same agent who had warned her about Shaquille's involvement in larger, more dangerous schemes. Linda, we need to talk. Agent Park's voice was clipped, professional, but there was an urgency in his tone. This is no longer just about the dealership. Linda's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I've already made my choice. I'm in this with Shaquille. I'm not calling to change your mind, Agent Park replied. But I need you to understand something. Shaquille's operation isn't just about dismantling the business world. He's using this dealership as a front for something bigger. He's in deep with powerful people who control far more than just this town. You're walking into something that could destroy everything you've worked for. Linda's mind raced. Are you threatening me? No, I'm warning you, Park said. You need to make sure you know exactly what you're dealing with. This isn't just a corporate takeover, it's a battle for power, and Shaquille is playing with forces that are way beyond you or me. Linda didn't know how to respond. She had already committed to Shaquille, but hearing this only deepened her doubts. She could feel the walls closing in, pressure mounting from all sides. If she stayed in this fight, there was no turning back. She had already made the decision to follow him, but this was a different level of danger, one that she hadn't fully grasped until now. The call ended abruptly, leaving Linda with a sense of dread she couldn't shake. She had trusted Shaquille, but was he hiding something from her? Was the fight he was waging worth the risk? Could she be part of something much darker than she had originally thought? She spent the next few days in a haze, torn between her loyalty to Shaquille and the warnings she had received from Agent Park. The fear of the unknown gnawed at her, but she knew she couldn't back out now. The employees were looking to her for guidance, for leadership. They had already seen the change she was working to bring, and she couldn't afford to let them down. But the weight of what she was about to confront was starting to feel unbearable. Shaquille's operations were growing more sophisticated. He was no longer just managing the dealership. He was expanding, making strategic alliances, creating a network that was starting to take shape. Linda saw the effects firsthand, watching as the once stagnant business began to thrive under his leadership. The sales numbers were climbing, and the dealership's reputation was improving, but Linda couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it was all too good to be true. One evening, Linda finally confronted Shaquille. She had to know what was really going on, whether she liked it or not. Shaquille, she said, her voice steady, I need to know everything. You've kept me in the dark for too long. I can't keep going without understanding the full picture. Shaquille looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. What do you mean? He asked, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips, but there was a tension in his posture that Linda hadn't seen before. I'm talking about the bigger plan, Linda said. You're not just buying businesses and taking down corrupt systems. This is bigger than that, isn't it? I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. Shaquille's eyes hardened, but he didn't flinch. I've never lied to you, Linda, he said, his voice low. You know exactly what this is. I'm creating something new. Something that can't be controlled, can't be bought. The people who've been running this world, they're scared of me. And they should be. Linda took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She could feel the tension rising, like a storm on the horizon. She didn't know how to feel anymore. She had trusted him, believed in his vision, but now, she was starting to question everything. Are you really trying to change the world, Shaquille? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Or are you just using this place, using me, to play a bigger game? Shaquille leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. I'm doing what needs to be done, he replied. And if you want to be a part of it, you'll have to trust me. There's no other way. Linda felt a chill wash over her. The lines between right and wrong were becoming increasingly blurred. She had chosen to trust him, but now, she wasn't so sure. She had to make a choice, stick with Shaquille and risk losing everything, or walk away and let the chance to change the system slip through her fingers. The dealership was thriving, but at what cost? She didn't know if she could go any further down this path. But as she stood there, facing Shaquille, Linda knew that the real battle was just beginning. She wasn't just fighting for the dealership anymore. She was fighting for her future for her place in a world that was quickly spinning out of control. And no matter which side she chose, she knew she would never be the same. Linda stood at the edge of a precipice, the weight of the decision in her hands. She had thought about this moment countless times, replaying every conversation, every warning, every step she had taken since meeting Shaquille. The reality of the situation was impossible to ignore anymore. She had committed to him, to his cause, to the vision of a transformed business. But now, with everything laid bare, she had to face the truth. This wasn't just a business revolution. This was a fight for power, for control, for everything she had once believed in. And the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. She walked through the dealership, past the rows of cars, seeing them not as assets to be sold, but as symbols of the battle she was now part of. The employees who had once been content with the status quo were now looking to her for guidance. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers of doubt in their voices. It wasn't just the new policies that were making them uneasy, it was the uncertainty that Shaquille had brought with him. Change was one thing, but this level of change was something entirely different. And Linda knew that if they didn't find a way to unite, they would crumble under the pressure. The decision she had made, to stay, to fight alongside Shaquille, was starting to feel like a curse. But what other choice did she have? She had promised herself she would see this through, and she wasn't about to back down now. Shaquille had made it clear that he was in this for the long haul. He had his sights set on something far beyond the dealership, beyond the local community. His words echoed in Linda's mind. If we can take control of this, we can change everything. One step at a time. But what did that mean for her? What did that mean for everyone she had worked with, fought for? The people around her, her colleagues, her employees, the ones who depended on her leadership, were still trying to make sense of the changes. Some embraced the transformation, seeing the potential for growth, for success. Others were more cautious, hesitant to get involved in something that felt like a gamble. Linda had done her best to reassure them, but deep down, she knew the battle for their trust was far from over. Shaquille had his vision, but Linda was beginning to realize that his vision wasn't the same as hers. He was willing to sacrifice whatever it took to get what he wanted, his ends justified by any means necessary. Linda had been willing to stand by him, to fight for the greater good, but the truth was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a battle for justice or fairness. This was about power, and it was a game Linda wasn't sure she was ready to play. She had always believed that leadership meant doing what was right, even when it was hard. But now, the lines were no longer clear. She wasn't sure if Shaquille's fight was the right one anymore. Was he really trying to fix the broken system, or was he simply trying to replace it with his own? Was he the hero, or was he just another man hungry for control? The tension in the dealership had reached a boiling point. The employees were beginning to fracture, each faction aligning itself with a different vision of what the dealership should be. Some still believed in Linda's leadership, trusted her judgment, while others had already started looking to Shaquille, ready to follow him blindly, convinced that he had the answers. Linda knew that if they didn't find a way to unite, to align their efforts, the entire operation would fall apart. She had spent so many sleepless nights wondering if she had made the right choice. She had committed to Shaquille, believed in his dream of changing the system, but now, she wasn't sure. The fight for power had become more complicated than she could have imagined. It wasn't just about the dealership anymore. It was about the future, her future, the future of the people who had worked alongside her for so long. Linda found herself facing a choice she had never anticipated. She could continue to follow Shaquille, putting her faith in him and his plan, but that would mean sacrificing everything she had ever believed in. She would have to abandon her own sense of right and wrong, her moral compass, to follow a man whose vision might not align with her own. Or she could walk away. She could cut ties with Shaquille, leave the dealership behind, and find a way to rebuild from the ground up. It wasn't an easy choice, but Linda knew it was the only one left. She had to decide what kind of person she wanted to be. The power Shaquille promised was intoxicating, but Linda wasn't sure it was worth losing everything that had once mattered to her. She looked around the dealership, taking in the faces of the employees who had put their trust in her. They were looking to her now, waiting for direction, waiting for her to tell them where to go. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. They needed her to lead, to make a decision that would affect the future of their livelihoods. But Linda wasn't sure she had the strength to make that decision. She was torn between loyalty and principle, between ambition and integrity. The stakes had been raised, and the world she had once known was slipping away. She had entered this fight thinking she could make a difference, thinking she could help Shaquille change the system. But now, she wasn't so sure. In the end, Linda knew that she had to choose for herself. No one could make this decision for her. She couldn't keep pretending to be something she wasn't, couldn't keep following someone she no longer trusted. She had to find her own path, even if it meant walking away from everything she had worked for. As Linda stood in the center of the dealership, the weight of her decision finally settled on her shoulders. She knew it was time to take control of her own destiny. She wasn't going to let anyone else dictate her future. Not Shaquille, not the employees, not anyone. It was her life, her choice. And for the first time in a long time, Linda felt ready to face whatever came next. She would walk away, but she would do it on her terms, ready to start over and rebuild the trust that had been lost. She was done fighting someone else's battle. It was time to fight for herself.